Okay, we'll continue where we stopped. The last thing that we discussed was the first issue, which was in that city in Raman's Mechiras Chametz problem, which was the lack of giving keys, which is something that the Tzemach Tzedek discusses in a bunch of places. Now the Tzemach Tzedek moves on to the second question. This goes in Ois Daled, page 87. In the shtar mechira that was given to the Rav, it says that you sell, that the chametz that's being sold from the Rav to the Goy, is the chametz that's being sold is the chametz which is in the rooms which are specified and marked with their borders. Right? And that was based on the shtar hashah each shtar hashah from each person that was given to the Rav. And that shtar hashah did have the addresses and the locations. However, that shtar hashah with the addresses and the borders was not given to the Goy. Not only that, they also didn't give him, they didn't read to him everything, they didn't give him they didn't read to him what it says in the shtar, so he didn't know where and what it is. Rather, the only thing that they wrote was that all the places we're renting, and all the chametz I'm selling. And on that, it creates a bunch of sveikas. The Tzemach Tzedek presents four chashashes that create a problem for this mechira. Number one, it creates a suffix on the validity of the kinyan agav. In addition to the kinyan kesef, there's also kinyan agav, which we usually do. The kinyan agav is done that based on, in addition, piggybacking on the rooms, you also get the chametz. Over here, the rooms are not known, the rooms that are being rented. If the rooms that are being rented are not known, how could you be kind of the chametz agav karka, which the karka is not known?
Aren't you buying agav the
Aren't
you buying it agav its own karka? Like, kinyan chatzin and kinyan agav is not the same kinyan?
No.
I know it's different kinyan, I'm saying like it's not done with the same.
No, that's why you give him the room, you're masker to him the room, and then he's koine the chametz agav the room that he's renting.
You can't not all those.
No. So that's why agav at least one room that he's renting with chametz. That's a question number one. Problem number one. First chashash. There's four chashashes. Chashash number two.
I understand. The chametz has to be, every single one of those chametz has to be done with agav. You can't do all those chametz agav my house.
There is, but there has to be one where there is chametz, and he's renting agav, he's getting agav that one. But each one, when he transfers to the Rav, it's agav the area. However, with the way we do the kinyan to the guy, it's agav one, he's kind of all of them. But you're masker one, you're being masker one to him, and through that one, he's kind of everything. Second chashash is, how could a guy come and demand if the guy wants to take any of the chametz away from him? He has no idea where the chametz is, and the seller could then go and make some of the chametz disappear, and play around with the sale. And therefore, maybe it's not a complete mechira, because since the guy has no access to the place where he's buying the chametz, so therefore, it might be that the chametz that it was not a complete mechira. Number three, we have the issue of achrayus that we discussed a few times, and therefore, if the chametz is, if the guy does not know which rooms there are, he can't be mischayev v'achrayus, which means that therefore the achrayus rolls back onto the yid. If the achrayus rolls back onto the yid, you have a problem with all the chametz. And the fourth one is that being that, okay, we know that in the Alter Rebbe shtar defines each one of the kinds of chametz, and today's we do it also. In this shtar that was given to the guy, it didn't refer to each kind. It didn't say there's wheat and there's cookies and there's candies and there's mashke. Rather, it said, we're giving you all the chametz.
The achrayus said the time goes on the yid, yeah?
Yeah.
You said that if you have a shtar kabbalah, you have a kabbalah.
Right, that's what the Rav said. And that's what the Tzemach Tzedek read it somewhere else. We're going to go through it over here also. So if you don't have a defined a description of the chametz that's being sold, it's a davar she'eino mesuyam, something which is not defined. Something which is not defined cannot be purchased. And now, even though the shtar says kafi hamekach shebe'ir zeh, which is something which is written in the Tzemach Tzedek in the Alter Rebbe shtar, and therefore there is the concept of pisuk damim, which means there was a price point and there was a definition, but ultimately you still have a suffix over here. And so Tzaddik points out that even though that from the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, it seems that he doesn't worry too much about specifying the kinds of chametz that he sees that it's so crucial to it, to so much to be able to cancel the kinyan, still we have a chashash. So Tzemach Tzedek explains that each one of these four chashashes is not a problem. The first chashash is, how can you be koina agav karka when the rooms are not known? So the Tzemach Tzedek begins by saying that this whole thing is based on machlekes, the Rambam against everybody else. The Rambam is the one that is machmir that you're not koine davar she'einu mesuyam, against what the Tzemach Tzedek says, sha'al chachmei hadoires, that say that you don't have to define clearly what the place is being sold is. And in Shulchan Aruch, in Choshen Mishpat, Siman Reishim Aleph Sif Daled, it brings bullshittis, and over there Taz Paskins that we go against the Rambam. And the Rambam himself in Choshen Mishpat, Siman Reish Beis Sif Zayin, also Paskins against the Rambam. So therefore, if you want to worry about this is a machlekes b'davar she'einu mesuyam, the hachras hapoiskim is that we go against the Rambam, and the kinyan is not cancelled because of that. However, the Tzemach Tzedek says this chashash is completely not warranted in this scenario, because over here we're not talking about a sale where you did not define what the property boundaries are. The whole discussion of the Rambam is when you sell somebody a piece of property, you tell them I'm selling you 10 acres, and you don't tell him where the 10 acres start, where the 10 acres end. He has no idea where it starts, where it ends. Over here, that's not what happened. Over here, each person did mark his room, did mark his boundaries, did put places, the mekoymes mesumonim, the chadarim. The people who sold did define the properties. At least when they gave it to the Rav, who's the Mursha, they defined it. So therefore, ein lecha siman gadol mizeh. There's no bigger simon than that. The fact that the guy didn't get it doesn't mean that it wasn't defined by the seller. The seller already defined where those rooms are. The only thing is the guy didn't find out yet. It's on the way. He'll find out if he needs to. So therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek explains that even according to the Rambam, a kinyan in such a scenario would work, which is according to the Rambam. Even according to the Rambam, the kinyan, such a kinyan would work, which is an interesting explanation in the Rambam, that the definition of the Rambam of davar she'einu mesuyam only applies when there is no clarity whatsoever. There was never any definition. But if the definition is there, and it was already defined, and it was already marked, the only issue is that the buyer did not receive yet the boundary maps, then the kinyan is still chal. That solves the first problem, that there's no kinyan agav. So there is kinyan agav because the rooms are defined. The second problem is that being that the guy doesn't have the exact listing of the places, the seller could go ahead and make disappear some of the chametz that is there, and therefore the kinyan might be invalidated. Tzemach Tzedek says it's also not a problem. Why? Because if you look, you have to look right now at the koine, not at the moicher. For the purpose of the koine can't back out of this deal. The koine signed on the deal, he cannot back out of it. The fact that the moicher could play shenanigans, it's not enough to cancel the mechira which happened. And this would be the same as moicher sadehu mipnei ra'asa, which we discussed before, that the sale is still valid even if it was not perfectly done according to all the rules. That so much so, there are certain scenarios where in the Gemara where one side could retract from the sale, and the other side, if one side cannot retract from the sale is still in place. So therefore, in this scenario, the fact that the guy cannot back out from the sale because he already signed off, made the kinyanim on this contract, the fact that the yid could play around afterwards does not invalidate the contract. And then what we see is, ultimately, if you need another raya for it, is that after Pesach, when you're going to see that the yid did not take anything out of the room, did not steal anything from the room, did not eliminate anything from it, then it retroactively, lemafreya, shows that the original kinyan was valid and goes lemafreya. And even though that during the holiday, during Pesach, the seller can go and eliminate something from the room, being that after Pesach we're going to see that it's completely valid, it's a mechira gemura lemafreya. However, the problem with this answer is that this only works if after Pesach the guy is going to go and actually buy all the chametz. If the guy afterwards, but we see that after Pesach the guy does not complete the sale at all, not lemafreya, not partially, not anything. All he does is that the guy gives back the chametz and doesn't pay anything. So therefore, how can you now say that the mechira becomes valid lemafreya, that it goes retroactively? It doesn't help you anything if it goes retroactively. The only thing retroactive is after, that we see afterwards he was kind of everything. But over here the guy wasn't kind of anything in the end. So therefore, we have to say that the reason is not because of this, that lemafreya, it shows it. Rather, we have to say that really the same logic as what we said in the previous answer. Really over here the moicher also cannot eliminate anything. Why? Because the shtar that the moicher gave the Rav did specify each and every place where it is. And the only issue, and the shtar from the Rav to the guy says also kemefurash b'shtaris. Yeah, it says. Therefore, the only way it's going to change, the only way the Yid is going to be able to retroactively do it, to change it, is if the Yid is going to go into the Rav's house, knowing that the shtar is there, take the shtar out of there, erase one of the lines that are in the shtar, and be mezayef of the shtar. Then you could say that he retroactively, then you could say that he was able to change it. But otherwise, the moment he gave the Rav the power to transfer that room to a guy, he's not going to be able to do it without doing a change of the document. And to go so far-fetched to say that we're going to cancel the kinyan because maybe the Jew could go into the Rav's house and mezayef of the shtar, it's too much and we're not going to go that far. Another reason is because we believe, the guy believes that the Yid is not going to back out of the business deal. Since the guy believes the Yid is not going to back out of the business deal, it's enough from the guy's point of view that the mekach should be kayim. What's the raya of it? Let's say you do give keys to a guy. You gave keys to a guy, a full, complete, regular sale, and the guy says, listen, I'm going out of town, takes the key, gives it to you in an envelope and says, I'm mafkid the key by you. I don't want to deal with it. Hold the key for me. It's my key. You gave me the key, but I want you to hold for me in your drawer as a pikadon. The guy trusts the Jew that he's not going to touch anything from his room, just like he would give him keys to his car, whatever it is. So it's not a problem. Same thing over here. Since the guy trusts the Yid that he's not going to take anything from it, he's not going to steal from it, they can't say that the mekach becomes batal because of that reason. So therefore, the second reason that we're going to be chayshish, maybe because the Yid might be able to be malim, it's enough of a reason to be mevatel the mekach, that is not enough of a chashash. So with that, we deal with the second chashash. So we move on to the third chashash. The third chashash is that the guy is not mischayev b'achrayus because he doesn't know where the property is, because he doesn't know where the rooms are. He can't be mischayev b'achrayus, and therefore it reverts back to the Yid. So now, the Tzemach Tzedek says, let's look at it this way. Now, up until now, we established that the mekach is kayim. We know that the sale is kosher, according to Allah. If this guy is going to come to Adin Torah with a Yid in front of us, what are we going to say? We're going to pass that the guy is chayev b'achrayus. Why? Because Api Torah, the mechira was chal, and he is chayev b'achrayus. And even if in דיני de Malchusa they would paskin that he's not chayev b'achrayus, over here we're not mischashev in דיני de Malchusa in such a thing. We're mischashev in the way it is, even though there are certain scenarios where if there is Shulchan Aruch says in the beginning of Cheshem Mishpat that we do say דיני de Malchusa din, and we would paskin when a guy and a Jew, we would paskin according to what דיני de Malchusa would say. So Tzedek explains that even that, what's talking about in Shulchan Aruch, in Cheshem Mishpat, it doesn't refer to such a case when the guy is directly with the Yid. It refers to when a guy sells his documents that he has, that he has a partnership with a Yid, Lamashal, a guy and a Yid, and then the guy goes and sells his document, his part of the partnership to a Yid, or his debt, or the debt that he's owed to a Yid, and then the Yid goes to Bezdin with the other Yid. And over there is when we say that if in דיני de Malchusa there would have been a schus for the guy, the Yid doesn't lose the schus, just because in Bezdin, the Yid doesn't lose the schus of Dinah D'Malchusa just because the guy then sold it. Because if the guy would have had the same schus, he would also have the same schus. But that only applies when the guy comes to Bezdin, when the Yid comes to Bezdin, Mikoyach from the guy. Over here, the guy comes, the guy would come to Bezdin. The guy would come to Bezdin, would paskin to him, according to דיני Yisrael, paskin, according to דיני Yisrael, he would be chayav b'achrayus. And therefore, since he would be chayav b'achrayus in Dineinu, so therefore we do not say the chashash that just because he doesn't know where the room is, that the achrayus falls apart. So now comes the question, but after everything we say, B'dinah D'Malchusa, the guy would not be chayav b'achrayus. Ultimately, what are we going to do? We can't completely ignore Dinah D'Malchusa. And therefore, if B'dinah D'Malchusa, a Yid would be chayav b'achrayus, at least outside the Suffolk, the Yid has to be mevar the chametz. Outside the Suffolk, maybe that he is chayav b'achrayus. So, and if he's not mevar the chametz, he's over in Bal Yeroeh or Bal Yemotzeh. Therefore, the only way that this is solved is back to the Arif Kablan. The Arif Kablan is the catch-all for most of the problems that we have. Being that the Arif Kablan is here, the Arif Kablan takes on all the achrayus of the moicher. It takes over all the issues between the guy. So now, what achrayus will there be klape the guy? The guy has nothing to do with the seller. If there'll be any issue between the guy, he's going to go to the Arif Kablan. The Arif Kablan is the one dealing with the Yid. The guy is going to go and collect from the Arif Kablan. He's not going to collect from the Yid. And therefore, there's no more chashashes of this issue. Then the Machzedek goes into a whole very interesting discussion about the definitions of the different arevim. I did jump over it until page 94, middle of Sif Hey. From page 94 to page 99, from middle of Sif Hey until towards the end of Sif Hey. And the Machzedek concludes regarding this chashash about Arif Kablan in the middle of page 99, that being that from the onset, the seller is relying on the Arif Kablan, and the seller is relying on the Arif Kablan is going to take care of everything. The guy is also relying on the Arif Kablan. The seller was never had any responsibility klape the guy, never had any achrayas klape the guy. The guy has nothing to do with the seller anymore. Only the Arif Kablan is the one who's nishtabed. We don't have this chashash, especially since in the Alter Rebbe Shtar, in addition to the Arif Kablan, there is a lashon over there that says that the seller is not going to have any tinus or any sort to the guy, which means that there's a complete separation between the two, and the Yid has no achrayas klape the guy, the seller, and the guy has no achrayas klape the Yid. The guy only deals with the Arif Kablan. If the guy only deals with the Arif Kablan, the issue of achrayas falls apart. And therefore, Tzemach Tzedek says it's not really an Arif Kablan, it's even a stronger Arif. It's an Arif called Shloif Dutz. And therefore, he becomes chayiv, the Arif becomes chayiv b'achrayus, and the seller has zero achrayus. Now, what the Tzemach Tzedek points out is in the fact that the shtar is not written in Russian, and therefore, the seller cannot go and collect the achrayus. If something gets lost, the seller cannot, they can't collect based on this shtar. It still works b'di'abed. The fact that it's not in the Lashon HaMedina works b'di'abed because he could collect from the Arif Kablan. Interestingly, one of the questions that Divrei Nechemia writes in the same Erechaim Siman Lamed Hey, and since the Alter Rebbe says Yesh Reshus Lahatik, but you don't have to translate it to Lashon HaMedina. The Divrei Nechemia says, realistically, you look at the Chukei HaMedina in Russia, and to be able to rent a property or these kinds of things, you do have to have an official document. You do have to have an official paper on the official government paper. So if so, that's one of the questions of the Divrei Nechemia is tzarich how it will help to write in Lashon Kodesh. Now, when you look in Shara Koilo and Oislam at Gimel, he clarifies it further, and he says, Taka, if somebody would want to go to court to collect in this scenario, there would have to be a shtar in Russian. But since we're not planning on collecting, the shtar would work. not planning on collecting. He says the fact is, the shtar works unless you want to collect with it. That means if you want to collect achrayus and the shtar is not a proper legal shtar, then you're not going to be able to collect anything with it. That's what the Shara Koilel says. It says, because we're not worried about collecting.
But the whole point is you want it to work.
It works. It works, but dineno. The fact that din machusa doesn't work, that should work. So that's why the shakos. That's why I think that's the reason why the Tzemach Tzedek wrote that b'di'evad it's moyel. B'di'evad it's moyel. Not, doesn't say the chatchil it's moyel if you don't translate. But remember, that Tzemach Tzedek over here is discussing a case when there was no keys given, there was no list of places given, and therefore the issue that we have in front of us is the issue of achrayus. And therefore, if you have the issue, the only issue you have left is the issue of achrayus, then, and you have a shtar which doesn't help you for achrayus, then you have the b'di'evad that works. But if you're dealing with a case where everything is specified, and there are keys given, or even if there are no keys given, everything is specified, and you're not worried about the issue of achrayus, l'cha'ira, it does. That's why it does work, the shtar. That covers the third chashash. Continues at Tzemach Tzedek that we're together the fourth chashash, that you did not specify in the shtar mechira every single kind of chametz that exists. They says Taka in Mekir Chayim, it does mention that you have to specify every kind of chametz that is being sold. And the Mekir Chayim is based on the Rambam which we mentioned before about Dover She'enu Mesuyum. Tzemach Tzedek explains that chashash is not a problem. In addition to the fact that he already said that we don't have to, Lachra is not like the Rambam. But even if you would follow like the Rambam, the fact that the shtar mechira says that you sell it b'mekach hashove be'ir, then the lekeach and the moicher some chadaitoi on the sale. The lekeach also some chadaitoi. He knows he's not going to get ripped off. He knows he's not going to get paid. The seller knows he's not going to get underpaid. The buyer knows he's not going to get ripped off. There's a buyer with some chadaitoi, the guy some chadaitoi on the shtar that's going to get the right price. And therefore, there's no shaila that there was no proper gemirus das on the part of the buyer to buy the chametz, and there's no shaila on the yid. There's no gemirus das on the yid that he's not chayshish to buy that he didn't want to fully sell the chametz. Huh? Yeah, the fourth chashash was that it wasn't mefurish wasn't mefarish all the kinds. He just wrote kol hachametz. He just wrote the general definition of all the chametz. So he says the fact that he writes kafei mekach ba'ir means that it is defined. You can't say it's not defined. Now, it is interesting. This is pretty much before we continue to next thing. If you look in the Madura Kama of this tshuva, there's two Madura Kamas in this tshuva, page 108, 109. The way that Tzemach Tzedek writes very short tshuva, before he wrote the long tshuva, he wrote a quick tshuva in Motzei Pesach to the Rav. The lashon of Tzemach Tzedek is that he's noite lahatir hachometz b'di'eved behefsid merube kozeh, even to eat and to drink. Av shelechatchile leishaper lemevad hachi ki tzarich davka mesiras mafteach. You need davka mesiras mafteach. First you have to give the keys. V'gam tzarich liyimser hashtar lenochri. You have to give the shtar to the guy. V'gam yifur to kol mekaymes. Yeah, you also have to give the shtar to the guy. You have to specify all the mekaymes. B'komokim di'eved nira di'esh tzaded lahatir mitzat shayar of kabum. But di'eved you could rely on all these things because of out of kabum and it kicks in b'di'eved. But lachatchile it seems like from this whole Tzemach Tzedek in the main tshuva, big tshuva, he didn't write that. But if you read through it, you see that the Tzemach Tzedek was the out of kabum. Yes, it's there as a catch-all, but it's a backup. The real way the mechir is being done, aside from the out of kabum, which deals with the monetary issue, the real is done by giving the shtar to the guy, by specifying all the places, by giving the keys, all these things. Otherwise, it's only a b'di'eved. Now, the last thing that we mentioned in this tshuva is that you have to specify all the kinds of chametz that are in existence. Now, what does it mean you have to specify all the kinds of chametz in existence? If you look in the tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek, Siman Mem Ches, it's page 119. Over there was a discussion, could we say that there is ha'arame when the guy does not see what he buys? The guy is buying everything, but he has no idea what he's buying. And the guy is a poor guy. He has no way of paying for it anyways. Doesn't have a penny to his name. Over there, it mamish looks like harama. Interestingly, in the different Nehemiah, when in same Siman Lamed Hey, one of the questions that he asks on the Alter Rebbe, he says it was helped out of Kabbalah, if the guy and the out of Kabbalah are both poor, it still looks like harama, because ultimately the Yid will still be chayv v'chayv. So that's the different Nehemiah. The Tzemach Tzedek explains that therefore the tikkun has to be that you have to write every kind of chametz that exists in this town. And the Tzemach Tzedek starts listing what they are. There's flour of this kind and flour of that kind, and there's this kind of mashke and that kind of mashke, and liquor and spirit and arak and beer, etc. And also you have to write the price of each one. You have to write the list of the kinds of chametz and the prices. But being that the shtar of the Alter Rebbe, if you look in the shtar of the Alter Rebbe, and today's shtaris, by the way, it says a whole list of kinds of things, and it also says that l'chayra covers this thing, that you don't have to actually write the prices. And the reason for it is according to the Mekayr, which you mentioned before. The Mekayr says you have to list every single kind of chametz. And Tzemach Tzedek says you also have to write each room and the borders of the room. And you have to, and then when the Rav sells the chametz to the guy, and he tells him that I'm selling you the chametz and I'm renting you the rooms based on the shtaros which are attached to it, and he rents out the rooms which are specified in the shtar, and he gives him all the keys. Tzemach Tzedek again points it out over here, and the guy has to stand close to the rooms where the chametz is, then there's no harama. Yeah, that's how the Tzemach Tzedek says that's the tikkun. However, then the Tzemach Tzedek goes and says why bichlal there's no harama over here. But I'm not going to get into that whole point, the whole thing over there. And therefore today, to cover that, you write bichlal the shtaris to cover all these issues we wrote until now. The Rabbanim tell people, right, if you're renting your whole house, if it's become b'mkoyim some sumanim, if it's a specific locker number, don't just write very general, write specifically. And then that qualifies the same as writing the borders of the room. And like I told you before, if you look in the Rebbe Shtar from Tafrit Tzaddik, it does say in the back the borders of the rooms. That is Siman Mem Ches. There are a few other interesting Tzemach Tzedeks that are relevant to this, a few other points, a few other דיעבds that are interesting over here. In Siman Mem Vav of the Tzemach Tzedek, page 111, it discusses chametz which came to the hands of the owners after they signed the Arshah to the Rav to appoint him as a shliach. I mean, let's say a person signs the Arshah on Yud Beis, and then chametz arrives on Yud Gimel or on Yud Daled in the morning. And the Tzemach Tzedek is a beautiful tshuva over here, which is definitely worth it to learn it, just like Memhei. Also, the Memvav is interesting. First of all, the Tzemach Tzedek explains why you could be memane a shliach now to do something which the Meshaleach himself cannot do yet. And even though in Gittin we see that it's not possible to do such a thing, the reason why in Gittin doesn't work is not because the chisaron in the shlichus, because the chisaron in lishma. That means if a person appoints a shliach to give a get to his wife, but he is not married yet, then it's not a shaila that the shlichus doesn't work. It just means that there is no lishma. There's no lishma v'lishma l'shem gerushin. It's not shaykh. But if it's not because the shaila and the shlichus. However, the shlichus to do something which the shliach cannot do, which the meshaleach cannot do himself, does work. More so, it's not really ein biyadei la'asoseh. You can't say that it's something which the meshaleach cannot do. It's just something that he could do, but not right now. At the time of the Arshah, he was not able to do it, not because he's incapable of doing it, but because he didn't have the product in front of him. But the moment the product will show up, he will be able to do it. So therefore, being that when the product shows up, he will be able to do it, therefore right now, he's able to imana shliach to do something that he will be able to do later. That's the second way of looking at it. The first way is there's rayas that you could be imana shliach to do something you cannot do. Second way of looking at it is it's not something you cannot do, it's something that you can't right now do, but you will be able to do later, and for that you could be Meman Shliach. And third of all, even according to the people who would say that you cannot do Meman Shliach in such a scenario, still, being that the Moicher already was Megala Das, that's what he wants to be done, he was Megala Das to the seller, to the Rav, that he wants him to sell the chametz, at this point it becomes a schus for him. And therefore the Rav could sell the chametz for him midin zachin la'adam shaloi befonov. Zachin la'adam shaloi befonov. For the seller. The Rav, even if you say shlichus doesn't work for the future, so here was Meman the Shliach, the Rav on Yud Gimel. Chametz showed up on Yud Daled morning. So on that chametz, you could say Zachin L'Adam Shlei B'Fanav, and the Rav is able to sell the chametz for him because he was Megala Das that he wants to do it. He could sell it for him mitzat schus, and that the schus also kicks in even if you say the shlichus doesn't help, because sometimes you could say Zachin within shlichus. Even if the shlichus does not kick in, you could still say Zachin L'Adam Shlei B'Fanav, and the Rav does it mitzad Zachin, and over here the Tzemach Tzedek says you do it mitzad the tziruf of both of them. And therefore the Tzemach Tzedek says you have to write in the shtar that you appoint the Rav to also sell the chametz that's going to come after the minui of the shtar until Erev Pesach, both midin shlichus and midin zachin. And if you look in today's shtaris, you will see that it does include shtaris that's sold to a guy. It includes in it the element that it includes also chametz that will come until the time of mechiras chametz. No, Pesach. No, that doesn't help Kadachas. Doesn't help anything. Now, there's another interesting one in the Tzemach Tzedek is Siman Peivav. We're going to get soon to if it works for somebody who's not interested in selling. You can't just put a phone book and sell the whole city's chametz. It doesn't work. Siman Peivav. Siman Peivav, the discussion is a person who remembered after Chatzos that he forgot to sell his chametz. And Tzemach Tzedek says there's no takana for it in Siman Peivav. If you look over there in the footnote 6, it says that the one who copied the Shuvas of Tzemach Tzedek writes that if it was done in the 6th hour, he remembered in Shah Shishis, there is maybe דיעבד that works. Now, in today's shtaris of chametz, of mechiras chametz, it also includes, the shtaris in today's nusach of the Rabbanei Chabad, also includes those that wanted to give the harshah, but they forgot. And those that usually give harshahs every year, and this year they forgot. That from all these people, the Rav says, I have the reshus and the request to be mezake, to be zoich, to do midin schiyah, to sell their chametz. That is something which is a dover pella. You could see that, you could say maybe it's based on the din of zachin when there is a gilui das. So you say, there was a gilui das. He wanted to sell it. He was his ratzon over here. The fact is, it's not really a gilui das, but he wanted, at least in some deep down level, he wanted to sell it because last year he also sold it. Or this year he wanted to sell to you, he didn't get a chance to send that a shah. Last year he sold to you, so this year probably the fact that it didn't sell is partially because he forgot to fill out the paper, but he really does want to sell it. Therefore there's zachin. But that's that's what it says in today's shtaris, and there's a whole discussion of how it exactly works out. But that only works for people who usually sell the chametz through you. I did see in Shailas Tshuvas Sharei Deya, which is from Lubavitch Rav, and there was I didn't put it in your book. I forgot to put it in also in Siman Nun Hey. There's two tshuvas over there. Two tshuvas that I'm going to discuss today. One is both of them are mechiras chametz. There's like 6 tshuvas in mechiras chametz. I'm only discussing 2 of them. Siman Nun Hey is discussing what somebody who appointed the shliach, appointed the Rav, told him, Baal Peh, I want you to sell my chametz in places A, B, and C. And the Rav forgot to write down C, only wrote A and B. And C is the place where he has all the mashke, the most expensive place, the biggest loss. So the Sha'arei Deya starts by discussing about what the Chasam Sofer says, that this creates a suffix on the whole Mechira. The fact that he only did 2 out of 3 creates a suffix on the whole Shluchas. Maybe the whole Mechira is nothing. And the Sha'arei Deya says it makes no sense to say that it messes up the whole Mechira. Rather, because we have a non-Sadi that he does want to sell, so at least the part which he specified, that for sure could be sold. At least Medin Schia. Maybe not Medin Shluchas. Even if you want to cancel the Shluchas, Medin Schia, at least for the parts that he did specify, you could do. It's for sure to Schus. But ultimately, the Shliach is coming here mitzad Shlichus, not mitzad Zachin. He's coming Medin Shlichus. And therefore, since he's coming Medin Shlichus, and the Shlichus doesn't Zbata, because he didn't fulfill the full Shlichus, maybe Schia doesn't work. And he says you can't say that Schia doesn't work in such a case. But he says it's hard for him to say that Schia would work, because he didn't find a strong yesod to say that Schia, Zachin, B'fanav works for selling chametz without the knowledge of the balabas. Now, over here, it's clear that the owner wanted to sell the chametz, because over here, what we're talking about when the Gemara says about zachin regarding chametz, it's discussing when the guy comes and takes the chametz before seif hazman. So we say medin zachin, it's fine. Why? Because we see that the guy came and took it, and you didn't stop him. But over here, the chametz is kayam, and it stays in the yid's reshus, which the guy rented. It stays by the yid until the end of Pesach. And even if you want to say schia, how can you say schia in such a scenario when the guy didn't go actually and take it? But he concludes, he says, even though he tries to be peirachet, he says, Nira li she'ein lanu l'chapes chumris bin yechomet sover l'ava Pesach, you can't look for too much of chumras. And Adarab, if you look from the simple explanations of the Poskim, it says they were not choishish to this. Uklalahu is a klal, the yochel adam limker chemtze shel chaveri sheloi midaitei. He says it's a klal, the general rule that you could sell your friend's chametz sheloi midaitei. Why? Because according to the Machne Ephraim, he explains that any form of schus gamur, even if the person who you're doing the schus for is standing over there and screaming that he doesn't want you to do it for him, we still say that originally he was masking for the schus to be done for him. Right now he's going through difficulties, so he's screaming at you. But it'd be really to schus for him. And mechiras chametz in the time when the alternative is that it becomes aser ba'ano, bevadai sheschus gamur huloi ve'en kan beis michush klal. That's how he explains it. However, the Sha'arei Deya still was machmir and says that he only wants to apply it to the 2 places that were mentioned. That the shliach batched up and only wrote 2 places. On those 2 places, for sure, you could do medin zachin. On the 3rd place, he says, being that to say zachin is hard to say in such a scenario, but being that it's included in the bittul, if mechira doesn't kick in, bittul kicks in. And he made a shliach to sell it, but the shliach just was nanas and didn't do it. So you could rely on bittul. You mevatel that chad betrei. You mevatel that mashke chad betrei, and you sell it to a goy. That's how he does it. So he's very extreme against the zachin la'adam without knowledge. In Siman Nun Ches, in the same book, the tshuva from his son. That book, Sha'arei Deya, is from him and from his son. And Ches, he has over here, there's discussions about there was a certain city where the Rabbanim would write in the shtar that it includes all the chametz that the people forgot to mention. It doesn't say it includes all the people that forgot, it includes all the chametz that people forgot to tell the Rav about. And some Rabbanim argued that it works within Schia, and some Rabbanim said that it disables the whole Mechira, because it creates a question on the whole, puts a cloud in the whole Mechira. And there was a whole discussion if someone who forgets is considered the Oinus, is considered the Pesheya, and they were noted to explain why it's considered the Anus and not a Pesheya, and therefore it should be fine. And he brings it out from the Nahar Shalom and Erechaim, where over there it seems like he's matir even ba'achila when it was in such a scenario. But still, he says ultimately we have a problem from the Chasam Sofer. Why? Because the Chasam Sofer in Hilchos Gittin says that we say Zachin le Adam shalei b'fanav. You could be mezakeh something to a Jew, not Zachin me Adam, that the Bezdin is going to take something from somebody midin schiyah. So, there's a shayla says, how can you say Zachin me Adam? So he says that my father already took apart the Chasam Sofer in the other tshuva, and especially since we're dealing with a Bezdin, and the Bezdin does have the koyach to do Zachin me Adam, shaloi b'fanav. You could take something, lafkia, something from somebody. Now, if you remember, we did discuss this, not in Hilchos Pesach, but in Hilchos Eruvin, when we discussed whether a Bezdin has a right. Lafkia, the Alter Rebbe does not mention this whole idea, but we did discuss the shit of the Chasam Sofer, different shittas, when you could be mafkia something from somebody. I'm not going to get into it now. But there is a concept that the Bezdin could be mafkia from somebody when it's mafkia from somebody when it's a schus for him. The marshal, when he has to pay certain expenses of his children, he's not interested in doing that. The Bezdin could be mafkia from him, it's midin zachin. And he says, but ultimately, if you're going to question this element, that the Rabbanim included all the chametz that people forgot to write in the shtaris, and then you're going to question the whole mechira, it's going to cause that you're going to question the whole mechira, not only this element of the mechira, but the whole mechira. If the whole mechira is based on zachin, you have a big question. So therefore, he says you have two alternatives. Either if you're going to worry about this, you're questioning the whole mechiras chametz. If you're not worried about it, then leave it as be. And he says better not to question the whole mechiras chametz. It's better to remain and to make that the whole mechira should be fine and not be megabev chumris and chametz of Pesach. But that is the shara day. But if you look in the Tzemach Tzedek, which I mentioned to you before, Tzemach Tzedek does include the element of zachin la'adam shaloi b'fanav when he discusses it in Siman Memvav, regarding when he discusses about something which is forgotten. And even though about somebody who forgot to remember it after that, Tzemach Tzedek says that it has no takana, but now when you put it in the shtar, al kapanim maybe but דיעבד it works, especially since we always look to be makel and chamesh of Pesach, which is a shayla derabanan. Now, when we were discussing this, I want to conclude with something which was mentioned, but I'm going to go through it more. One of the things that are mentioned during Mechiras Chametz, you will see by Baal Peh in Lubavitcher Mechiras Chametz, is that you tell the guy that if someone is going to steal chametz from you, even if the guy who sold it to you is going to come and take chametz, use chametz during Pesach, it's considered stealing. It's not mevatel the whole mechira. That is based on a letter from the Rebbe. It's on page 180 in your book. It's really not one letter from the Rebbe. It's a back and forth between the Rebbe and Shmuel Pesach Bogomilsky. Over there, he was working on doing mechiras chametz for people in Barbados, in Tafshin Chaf Aleph, Chaf Gimel. And they asked the Rebbe whether he should be mesader mechiras chametz when there is a chashash that maybe the Yidden are going to go and take from the chametz in the middle of Yom Tov. And the Rebbe responds, first of all, it's pashut that you have to do it. Pashut, underline that you have to do it. And the chashashes that you have that maybe the Yid is going to steal from the guy. First of all, not every single person that's going to do it through you is going to steal from a guy. So at least for those people, you solve them. Mashmo, says the Alter Rebbe, is that if a Yid steals, is not mevatel the mechira. Rather, he becomes a gazlan for what he took. Even to those who are machmer that say that it cancels the mechira, it doesn't cancel the mechira retroactively, it only cancels the mechira from now on. Why? That doesn't explain it, but that means that once you steal it, you cancel the mechira, which means you take it, it becomes your achrayas again. So at least for the first 3 days before he stole from the guy, there was mechiras that he wasn't able to bali matzah. And more, it's a lav shem b'maisa and leikin olav, etc. And the Rebbe says, therefore, and the Rebbe explains a few other reasons of it. And therefore, the Rebbe says matzia that maybe it should be written in the shtar that the Jewish seller or his appointee becomes the power of attorney of the guy to sell for him or to give by a present. One of the ways to do it, the Yehudi, the Jew or Bakoichai becomes the Bakoich of the Goy to sell for him. He becomes the Goy's employee. So therefore, if he takes and he sells, he's not mafkia the mechira. Or that the mechira only includes anything except for what he's going to steal. Like 2 years later, the Rebbe sent. 2 years later, the Rebbe sent the Maskira sent a note what to add in the shtar, and that was that the first part that Shu Matzia in such a scenario when you chashash that the Yid is going to steal from the guy, that the Yid should become the Yid or the Yid's bakoyach should become the guy is appointing the Yid back as his employee to sell the chametz for him, and then it does not become an issue. I never saw this written in the shtar mechiras chametz, but this is something which is explained Baal Peh to the guy that if it's stolen from him, it's not mafkia, and if a Yid sells it, he's selling it on behalf of the guy, and then the cheshbonos are going to be made afterwards. However, the Rebbe adds, make sure to warn those Yid not to do such a thing. The only thing is that if it's done, they're not about the mechira, but warn them not to do such a thing. Don't rely on it. Don't create a opening for them to do it. But Poyos, I'm saying that we don't write this in the shtar, but it said Baal Peh to the guy. What Baal Peh helps or doesn't help. If you look in the Sharei Deya, different tshuva in the Sharei Deya, I forgot which, I think is Siman Zayin. Over there, he discusses whether things that are said Baal Peh in Mechiras Chametz work. He brings a raya from the Tzemach Tzedek in tshuva and Tzemach Tzedek in Hilchas Ribis, that when it comes to Heter Iske Baal Peh, Heter Iske Baal Peh works if both sides understand what it is, and the Heter Iske Baal Peh works. Therefore, if it's something which is clear, that's done Baal Peh, both sides understand the deal, then even if it's not written B'chsav, it does work. Now, if you look in Shalos HaTshuvas Tzemach Tzedek Siman Nun, it's on page 154, it discusses a worker, a Goysha employee in the house, a woman. She took chametz and Achin Shepesach, and she wanted to prepare dough. She's a dedicated worker in the house. She knows that Achin Shepesach at night they have to Yidden dafen essen. 8.5 days they didn't eat any bread, and she went into the storage room and she took out chametz, and she took out the starter, and she started working to prepare challah for the people, fresh bread for the crowd. And the Tzemach Tzedek says that chametz you have to mevayir, and it's aser b'ana. Why? Because the goya, why did she take it? She stole it. She took it on behalf. She stole it from the guy. The guy that one guy stole from another guy, from the guy that bought the chametz. And the reason she stole it was with the intention of being zoiche for the Yid. She made it for the Jew. And yesh ha'imrim, that there is schiyah shlichus by a guy lechumra. And even if it's not so, ultimately over here will still be machmer. And what happens is that being that the flour was originally belonged to the Jew, and now the Goya went and took it out of there, shel sheleach yad in the Goy, that creates that retroactively there was never mechira chal on this specific bag of flour. Especially if it was done in the chatzar of a Jew, the chatzar koine. And you can't rely on the element that maybe the Yid had in mind not to be koine because lo nichale that there should be koine. Because when he saw it, he should have been meichen. He wasn't meichen. Now, if you look in the Madura Basa to this Madura comment to this tshuva, which is in page 155 in the same book, over there the Tzemach Tzedek adds that the fact that he didn't have in mind, why doesn't it help when you say that the Yid has something and he had in mind not to be koinet? He says that's mamish ha'aroma. And the whole idea of lo nichale that we rely on in other places in chametz, the mashal, if a guy brings chametz to a Yid's house, we say lo nichale. But that only works when the ikar chametz belonged to the guy beforehand. So then we say lo nichale. But over here, it never belonged to the guy to begin with. It belonged to the Jew. The sale of the chametz was only done lafkia me'isur. It means it's not really a full sale. And therefore, when the Goya went and took it, she was Zoiche on behalf of the Jew. So now it left the Rishus of the Goy who's the buyer. And it's not that now she purchased it, she stole it back and it became Jews. It means that retroactively, that chametz belonged to the Jew the whole time. Why? Why do we say that? Because why did the Goy buy the chametz? The Goy is not paying the whole thing in the beginning. The Goy is going to pay the out of Kabbalah when? 2 days after Pesach, when he makes the cheshbon. If he wants to. He makes the cheshbon, he wants to buy it. So the Goy is koinet, but only al das of the medida, the cheshbon is going to happen later. And he's not going to pay for this bag of flour or this thing that was stolen. And therefore it remains in the reshus of the Yid and it becomes chametz shavar al Pesach and it needs biur. If you look from the Tzemach Tzedek over here, Tzemach Tzedek takes the approach that yes, it does not mafkia the whole mechira. If you go back to what the Rebbe said, the Rebbe gives either the mechira is not batel, he only becomes a gazlan, or it only goes from now mikanu lahaba, but not on the avar. Tzemach Tzedek is a different way. The mechira mikara not chal only on this specific thing that was stolen. So he was over in Bal Yerah, Bal Yimatzu, but on this specific thing that was stolen. It doesn't cancel the rest of the mechira, and you see that in other places in the Shuvas of Tzemach Tzedek when it discusses about if there's chashashos in the mechira, Tzemach Tzedek was careful never to say that the mechira becomes batel. Rather, the chalais of the mechira happens. There might be a shayla of mashkin, there might be a shayla of achrayas, there might be a shayla that he has no other reasons, but the mechira always remains in place. Now, despite the fact that you look at Tzemach Tzedek, you see Tzemach Tzedek seems to be not so comfortable with mechiras chametz the way it's done so much. It is to a certain degree a little bit of harama, and you see it the same thing in Hilchas Ribis in Tzemach Tzedek about harama. Tzemach Tzedek explains why he refers to Mekor Chaim about on Hilchas Pesach regarding to harama. But B'Poyel Tzemach Tzedek did sell chametz gomer every year. If you look in L'Shem HaOizen, the stories of Shnei Zalman Duchman over there, I forgot the number now, but I'm sure somebody could find it. You'll probably find it. About mechiras, that in the Tzemach Tzedek section, it says over there that the Mesharis would buy the chametz, would every year, right after Achash Pesach, they would put away in the chametz that was being sold, they would put a full challah that's baked in the chametz that was being sold in Erev Pesach, and Mitzvah Pesach, the Mesharis would go, take out this challah after it was bought back from the guy, and would prepare it to serve to the Tzemach Tzedek. And when people ask him questions, he says, "What do you want? The Tzemach Tzedek has to eat. He didn't eat for a whole week." And that is the discussions that have to do anything that is relevant to the actual mechira. The next year is going to be, the final year is going to be on Wednesday, is going to be on Sheres Yehuda Siman Yud Beis and other simonim in Tzemach Tzedek and Siman Mem Tes, Siman Pei Zayin, which discuss selling a business as a whole to a guy, because in those days the way it worked was a person had the contract from the parrots, that the parrots owned the land, and you had a member, you had a certain contract that you were in charge of supplying all the beer, so you're in charge of the mashke places. Some states in Canada still have it, that the government controls it, the parrots controlled it, and it would give rights to certain people to do it. So the Yidden were, one of the businesses the Yidden were allowed to do was they were able to buy the rights to sell it. But there's no way that a party is going to sell you the rights if for 9 days you're going to have the bars closed. The country's going to be a revolution. It's not going to work. So therefore, there had to be a way to be able to sell the whole business to a goy, but it wasn't done that to just fill out the paper. There was a full, proper sale with accounting and everything done, and that is what we're going to discuss in the next year in Mitzvah Hashem on Wednesday.